to Liberal Judaism. I'm Rabbi Charlie Bogitsky, and it's a real pleasure to invite you here for our first hot potato. If you didn't know what a hot potato, Liberal Judaism's hot potatoes are an opportunity for us to be able to bring different people together to discuss some of the issues that might be in the news or concerning us. We obviously, one thing that has been talked about much in our community and outside our community is tonight's topic, but I hope that you've also seen on your chair that our next hot potato on the 4th of April will be on citizenship. It'd be lovely to see that many of you come back and join us for them. Liberal Judaism really believes that we need to provide an opportunity for people to be able to talk, that we hold within our walls many, many different opinions, and that actually we are the place that can bring them together and have a discussion in a way that is respectful and educational. And so I hope that we can follow those guidelines tonight in joining in together in this discussion, that we'll make sure that we are here to listen to each other, to listen to our panellists, and to talk to each other in a manner that we would want to be talked to. It's a great pleasure to thank our panellists for being with us tonight, and for Callum, who agreed to come and chair tonight's panel for us. At the end of the evening, I will remind you again about follow-up events, but I hope that you enjoyed tonight's event. Thank you.
Rabbi Charlie, thank you very much, and welcome everyone to the first in this series of discussions about Liberal Judaism's hot potatoes. I didn't expect when I signed up for this a few weeks ago for the potato in question to be quite this scorching, but it has been a heart-rending week. Labour is split, and some who have split have blamed endemic anti-Semitism. People in this room, people on this panel have left their party or seen their political heroes leave their party, and others have had the integrity of their religion called into question because they wanted to stand up for their political beliefs. Next month, the Jewish Labour movement will begin discussing whether to dissociate from the party after 100 years. One of our panel wrote this week, "I'm tired of people simply talking about Labour and anti-Semitism. Rhetoric achieves sod all." Thanks for coming all the same, Mike. Someone else has written, "Too many debates, especially on social media, involve the ritual exchange of talking points and performing for a team, presenting only the parts of the truth that happen to be useful for it." I hope we can try and avoid that. Adam Wagner is our 5th panellist, and he has been detained, and he hopes to be here a little bit later. Let's, though, heed the advice of the 3rd panel member. It is time to remove the hate from our politics and time to inject some hope. We'll hear an introduction from each of our panellists. We'll talk about how we got to the place Labour and the Jewish community find themselves in right now, and talk about where we might go from here. I will invite some questions from the audience a bit later on. So in no particular order, Miriam, can I start with you? Can I ask you to describe your relationship with Labour and ask how this makes anti-Semitism such an important issue?
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me today, and thank you to Liberal Judaism for organising this. It's a really much needed event. So my name's Miriam Mirwitch. I am the National Chair of Young Labour, and obviously a Jewish woman. The Labour Party is really at the centre of my political beliefs, and it has been for quite some time. I joined the party when I was 16. I was angry about Tory austerity. I looked at my community and my friends losing their EMA, and that's the educational maintenance allowance. I noticed what the Tories were doing to our country, and I felt like I needed to do something. And then I sort of got involved in my local party, my local Young Labour group. Young Labour represents all Labour Party members under the age of 27. And in the spring of last year, I was elected as national chair. And really, the Jewish community does desperately belong in the Labour Party. Like, we should have a place here. And there's such a proud history of Jewish socialism and Jewish trade unionism on the left that we don't talk enough about. And it's heartbreaking that we've got a situation where there is such an endemic issue of anti-Semitism on the left, and it's something that isn't necessarily new. It's something that's been present for a very long time. But we should be able to feel like we have a home in the Labour Party. One of the things that I notice as Young Labour chair is a number of great young Labour activists who are Jewish and getting involved and want to have a place in the movement, but have to face huge amounts of abuse and justify themselves because of their religion. So it's an issue which is not just at the centre of my identity, it's also at the centre of the country, because we can't have a situation where anti-Semitism is allowed to go unchecked.
Thank you, Miriam. Mike Segalov, can I ask you the same question about your relationship to the Labour Party and why that makes anti-Semitism so important to you?
Yeah, so I'm a journalist, so my job daily is to write about things and to look at what's kind of going on in society. And I'm a member of the Labour Party, so like by necessity, those two things go hand in hand. The way I see the world is through my membership of the Labour Party, and vice versa.
And vibrating.
Yeah, we'll carry on. Can everyone else hear that noise? It's just in my head.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. It's been a long week. I might just take this off, or is that alright? Can everyone hear me without it?
Well, if you speak slowly,
We
I can hear you, but if you speak fast,
Yes, no, I will speak. I will start speaking more.
you do have a fast way of speaking.
Thank you. Get more in that way. So now I'm holding two microphones. That one down. Yes. Okay. So I joined the Labour Party in 2015 when Jeremy Corbyn was running to be the leader of the Labour Party, and I did so with because my politics and the politics that I was seeing other young people talking about went hand in hand, and I never imagined for a second. I think in part because of my naivety maybe about some of the blind spots that I think some older people on the left may have to anti-Semitism. I never really realised it was ever going to be an issue. Maybe that was naivety. And I remember when this started out in 2015, I was somewhat baffled because my experiences of anti-Semitism been on the receiving end had never come from the left. They come from the right. They come from kind of seeing Nazis marching through the streets when I'd gone to anti-fascist demonstrations. They come from abuse I'd received as a child, never from the organised left. In the last few years, I suppose what I've come to realise is that I think there's a complete lack of understanding amongst society more broadly, and in part specifically on the left about specific issues, not about the more traditional forms of anti-Semitism, the Nazis, swastikas, the far right, but some of those more subtle forms that I think people in this room would know to be, would understand and would know to be what they are and recognisable, but often people outside of this room, outside of our community, maybe don't. And I think that's what the key facet of the problem that I've come to witness in the Labour Party is, and I should caveat, we'll come to this later, I think it's a tiny proportion of people within the Labour Party, within the left more broadly, who are guilty of this, but there's a complete lack of knowledge or lack of understanding about what anti-Semitism looks like when it's not in its traditional guise, and I'm hoping that we can talk a bit about that tonight, but I suppose that's where I start from.
Thank you, Mike. Ella, can I ask the same question of you, your relationship to the Labour Party and why anti-Semitism is important in that context?
So my name is Ella Rose, and up until late last year I was the National Director of the Jewish Labour Movement. I joined the Labour Party when I was about 20, recognising that the Labour Party for me was the only social, positive, progressive force that could actually change this country for the better. And I wanted to be a part of that, and I wanted to maybe naively change the world and do some good. I was at the time the president, or about to be the president of the Union of Jewish Students, and I knew that for me, being Jewish and being Labour went hand in hand. My Jewish values of tikkun olam, of healing the world, of looking out for each other and being part of the community felt like the same as joining the Labour Party. And the Labour Party has always been a space where I felt community and love and brilliant friends and amazing experiences. I've been a candidate in my home ward. I've held far too many roles in my constituency Labour Party. I currently represent my county on the East of England regional board. I think for me, the crux of when I saw and experienced anti-Semitism within the Labour Party was when I joined the Jewish Labour Movement in mid-2016. And the Jewish Labour Movement, for those who don't know, is the Jewish affiliate of the Labour Party, having been founded in 1903 and affiliated to the Labour Party in 1920. And within my first 3 weeks, I'd started having horrendous online abuse, and really took a lot for me to process and get used to. I had some online abuse from the far right at UJS, but I never thought I would experience the scale of anti-Semitism, of misogyny and abuse inside what should be, you know, the country's political progressive force. And it was very difficult for me, and that abuse goes on despite the fact I no longer work at the Jewish Labour movement, and it's been, you know, very difficult. And for me, the sort of two main points of JLM, we, together with Adam, who I worked with at JLM, wrote the Labour Party's Understanding Anti-Semitism, or Confronting Anti-Semitism and Engaging Jewish Voters. I've personally trained over 2,500 members of the Labour Party up and down the country in student clubs, at national conferences, at regional conferences. And I'd say a decent 50% of those training sessions included experiences of anti-Semitism, from people protesting outside that I wasn't, or my organisation wasn't fit to hold that training, to people coming in to specifically confront me about questions of the Holocaust going on in Gaza, and some really upsetting and hard instances to take. And the other thing, I think probably the thing I'm most proud of at my time of the Jewish Labour movement, was when we organised a letter of 68 Rabbonim, many of whom from this fine tradition of Judaism. And that was, for me, unprecedented. You know, ultra-Orthodox Rabbonim who do not believe that women can be rabbis, proudly putting their name on the same letter as rabbis who are women. And for me, that was an incredible moment. Not only do I think was it groundbreaking for the Jewish community, because some elements of our community could be more progressive, but also because it showed the severity of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and the things people were willing to do to try and make their point. And I look back on my time at the Jewish Labour movement now, and I don't know if anything we did changed anything. I don't know if we made the Labour Party a safer space for Jews, and I don't know if any of the hard work that Adam, myself, and, you know, hundreds of Labour activists has made the Labour Party a safer, more welcoming space for Jews, but I'm damn proud we tried.
Thanks, Heather. Adam Langleben, can I come to you last of all? Can you describe your relationship to the Labour Party and why that makes anti-Semitism so important?
So hi, I'm Adam Langleben. I was a Labour Party member from 2006 until Monday this week. My journey in the Labour, I'm going to take this off as well if that's okay. I'm going to stand up so people can hear me, or see me as well. My journey in the Labour Party began kind of here, spiritually, in some ways, in that I grew up in the Reformed Jewish tradition. I was involved in RSY Netza, and I was lucky enough to have been given a full scholarship to go on Shnat Netza, the gap year programme, jointly run by LGY Netza and RSY. And I grew up in a household, a relatively low-income household. I've never spoken about this before, but now perhaps I'm out of the Labour Party, it's time to. And my family struggled quite a lot. And my community, my Jewish community, were essential in helping me cope with that. But what it instilled in me was an immense sense of social justice, the fact that actually sometimes people are dealt a bad hand, and there is a responsibility for the state to help people in that situation. And that was personal experience. Anti-Semitism for me also came hand in hand with that, in that when I was 12 years old, I attended a non-Jewish high school in High Barnet, and in the first year of being there, I had my arm broken for being Jewish. Now, this was a school in the middle of a Jewish area, but I was the only Jewish child in my year group at school. So I experienced anti-Semitism firsthand from there, and my parents, who prior to that were not believers in Jewish schools, suddenly very quickly became believers in Jewish schools due to experience, and I think that's mirrored elsewhere. Now, the Labour Party changed my life because I as I said, I went on Shnat Netza. I spent a year in Israel trying to change the world. I'm a lefty on everything to do with Israel. I'm anti-settlements. I'm anti-Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm exactly. I'm proud of my views on that, and also I'm proud of my values of wanting to devote myself to Tikkun Olam and making the world a better place. So when I came back from Shnat Netza, I decided to get involved in the Labour Party, because for me that was the practical way in which I could do something in this country, from Britain, the country I love and care about, to make this world a better place. It was putting that into practice. I was an activist. I grew up giving up my weekends for the Labour Party, too many of them, my evenings, and eventually I had the great honour of being elected as a Labour Party councillor for West Hendon in 2014. West Hendon was a Labour-held ward, has a 14% Jewish population. I was very proud to have represented residents against social cleansing committed by the council on a housing estate in West Hendon, amongst other achievements. And I'm very sad that, unfortunately, in May this year, the voters of West Hendon, who had returned Labour councillors for 40 years, chose that they could not any longer vote for Labour. They could not do it. And I had people crying to me on their doorstep saying, I'm Jewish, I've voted Labour my whole life, but something I see in front of me is rotten, absolutely rotten. And I could not justify to them why they could vote Labour in the current circumstances. I just couldn't. And as everyone may know now, Barnet did not go Labour. It was Labour's #1 target. I'm very happy that my friend and my mentor, Danny Rich, was elected. I'm very sad that I never got the honour of serving with him. He's someone I have a great deal of respect for. But that was that. Every single ward with a Jewish population of 5% or above in Barnet, where Labour had to win, Labour did not win, and Labour went backwards. So there's a direct electoral impact. Now, I don't blame those voters, because the issues have not been addressed, and we'll get to that later, hopefully. But for me, on Monday this week, I decided that I could no longer remain part of the Labour Party. I could no longer justify that to myself, to my family, to my friends, and say I'm proud to be part of a political party that I believe is being led by anti-Semites at worst, and people who hold our community in contempt at best. And I'll talk about that later in terms of why, but I'll give you two final anecdotes. Just a few weeks ago, at my local constituency Labour Party, after we had selected a new parliamentary candidate who was not the chosen candidate of the left, at this meeting, throughout the meeting, a gentleman at the back was muttering under his voice, Zionist bitch, the whole time, the whole meeting. Whenever she stood up to say anything at all, this guy was muttering under his breath, Zionist bitch. And people in the room could hear it. And no one, other than the Labour group leader and Barnet Council, intervened. No one at all. And for me, that represented a culture that has developed whereby people know they can't recognise it. And that's why I think the organisation is sick. I think, unfortunately, we've reached a point where it's beyond repair. But I'll leave it there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's start on how we ended up here. The panel kind of agree that the Jewish community and the Labour movement go hand in hand. That's a phrase that's been used several times. Ella, can I come first to you? How has this happened? How has a party historically anti-racist, historically, some have said, a natural home for Jewish people, ended up amid this much controversy?
I think there is one very simple answer to that, which is views that in the past would have been stamped out, that would have been viewed as completely unacceptable, are now being allowed to get away with. I think there's one rule for the comrades and one rule for everyone else. We see it time and time again, that if someone is in a politically convenient position, if they're a councillor, if they're a parliamentary candidate, if they're a former MP, let's say maybe a Labour Assembly member, if their comments are truly anti-Semitic by anyone's definition of anti-Semitism, you know what, it's fine, they can apologise and move on and have maybe some non-existent anti-Semitism training. I think there is a culture within the Labour Party that doesn't want, I don't think the leadership particularly wants to expend the political will to try and stop it. I think it's too dangerous for them.
You've talked about individual examples there, and you've named people in particular positions. These are all, without necessarily going into all the individual cases, these are concrete examples that you could point to, are they?
There are thousands of examples that people can point to. Both, everyone on this panel has personal experience of anti-Semitism, and I think I don't think I know a single Jewish member of the Labour Party that hasn't had an experience of anti-Semitism. I actually can't think of any. In 2015, we, as a party, ran elections under new rules, and I think that massively changed things. We had, pure one member, one vote, which conceptually is a brilliant idea, but when you have registered supporters, I mean, it was reported this week that someone who's been convicted of Holocaust denial joined up to sign as a registered supporter for Jeremy Corbyn in 2015. And I think we have to ask ourselves, why as a party, people who should share no values with our Labour Party signed up to be a part of it? And I don't think you can lay the blame firmly in one person's lap, although I know some people love to reference a punch thrown in Stranger's Bar. But I think we have to look very carefully at our party and say, why has this become the home of anti-Semites? Why has it become a place where anti-Semitism isn't just alive, it's thriving, it's flourishing, and it's growing? I think it's happened because there's been an endemic growth of conspiracy theories, of people who, some of the anti-Semitism we've seen would have previously been, you've only found on the far right and neo-Nazis, the growth of social media, this new sharing of ideas, where people are sharing, promoting, asking permission to use graphics from extreme right-wing sites. And these are people who represent the Labour Party as delegates to conferences and councillors. I think we've got a sick and toxic culture.
Mike, do you think there's one rule for the comrades and one rule for everyone else?
No. I think there's political expediency, which is exercised, I think, wrongly by political parties on all sides of the spectrum. I totally accept that I would like to see people treated more harshly in their positions of authority, and sometimes people are let off because it's convenient, but I don't think that's particular to the left nor to anti-Semitism. That said, I think if we want to trace back how we've got here, and Ella's analysis rings true to some extent to my mind, I think the key thing we have to keep on reminding ourselves of is that anti-Semitism isn't just growing and thriving, if that's the word, not a word I'd use, in the Labour Party, but in society more broadly. And it worries me sometimes when we have these conversations that we focus on how and why it's growing in the left without appreciating that it's growing awfully across Europe, in America too, on all sides of the political spectrum. Now, of course, the left needs to be held more accountable. It's progressive politics. It should be, understandably, you'd expect more racism from the right on the political spectrum. But to see it in isolation, I think is wrong. And then I think if we look at how the Labour Party got here in particular, I think we can trace the trajectory in two different ways. In terms of the actual politics, the conspiracy theories, that sort of weird type of anti-Semitism that I said earlier maybe is less recognisable to people. I think it comes from a lack of education and a lack of understanding. If you look at the fact that the Labour Party is now a membership organisation of over 500,000 people, you have lots of people joining it who've never been engaged in politics for the first time, who've not met Jewish people and have not had any sort of experience in education. Our education system is, and I don't mean within the Labour Party, I mean in society, is not equipped to teach people about racism. It doesn't do it properly. Our political education is broken. And so you've got a load of people who are suddenly engaging in politics, who found the Labour Party online and have suddenly found themselves, I think, unaware of some of these tropes that we see repeated. The second thing to say on that front is I'm also not entirely convinced that the anti-Semitism we talk about, and a lot of what we discuss and we'll discuss tonight, is abuse on Twitter, things we see online. I think in the last few years we've just become more able to express ourselves. 10 years ago, if you thought something anti-Semitic or you thought something ridiculous or whatever it might be, no one's going to hear you think it. But now we have a society in which every single person has access to a computer and can publish. And again, away from just anti-Semitism, if you look at the law, and Adam, hopefully Wagner can talk about this later, there's a whole new world of people taking actions in terms of data claims, because we can just share things more with our own publishers. And so we have a platform as individuals we didn't have before. And I know we were discussing earlier, a lot of the abuse that I see directed at me and elsewhere isn't coming from a woman or a man who I can recognise. Coming from an egg account on Twitter with a couple of random followers who are spewing out abuse. That's not a defence of them, but we see that sort of happen. So that's why I think the trajectory works in terms of the left, I guess. And then in terms of the leadership and why I think we've got to this point, my honest answer is I think that there is a historical blind spot, like I said earlier, to some forms of anti-Semitism in some parts of the left. And then also a bunker mentality that sets in within the Labour Party leadership. And we may have disagreements. My genuine belief is that Jeremy Corbyn is not an anti-Semite. I don't think that's true. I think that he has a blind spot to some of the issues, and it seems, on the surface, to be slow to deal with some of the serious problems that have arisen. And the Labour Party too has done the same. There's been a lack of speed, there's been a lack of efficiency, and a lack of transparency, and to some extent, potentially, a lack of a lack of enough effort going into it. But I think that the but is here too, to see it from his perspective, and I do try and do that from his and the people around him and his supporters, not the vehement anti-Semites, but the ones who continue to reject there's a problem here. Is for a couple of years, the leadership was consistently under attack from parts of the press, from members of its own parliamentary party, for all sorts of reasons. And a bunker mentality set in within that office, I have no doubt. And I think that what I've been trying to push for, and what I think is hopefully in the midst of happening, is finally the leadership can come out from that bunker with some humility and some gestures of goodwill and show some real desire, which I believe they genuinely have, to move forward on this.
I'm hoping we're going to talk about Jeremy Corbyn himself in particular a bit later, but let me come back to something you said earlier and talk to you, Miriam, about this. Would it be this bad if it weren't for the internet?
I think the internet plays a big part in it, but I don't think we can blame just the internet for the existence of anti-Semitism. I think there has been a culture for a long time where, as Adam said, people making these comments is allowed to go unchecked in meetings of people who should know better. And too often, people who believe in the same things as I do, believe in solidarity or in standing up for Palestinian rights, they in those meetings will actually tolerate people saying pretty racist, anti-Semitic, disgraceful things and just be like, well, it's all right because we're all fighting for socialism here. And for a long time, that has actually been present. And I think there hasn't been enough of a call-out culture, enough of thinking about what things actually mean and standing up and saying, even though I politically agree with you on lots of things and this might be uncomfortable for me, this isn't all right. But I do think the internet plays a big part in it. The vast majority of the abuse I receive manifests itself online, but I'm not going to pretend that I don't think that people would still think that if it wasn't for the internet. Like, it might still be the case. It's just made it a lot easier for anti-Semitism to spread because people who might not know better, aren't actually familiar with a lot of anti-Semitic tropes, will see a statement and think, oh, that's all right, that's just me, allying myself with a certain cause or a certain person, and then I'm going to repeat what they've said, and that's going to be okay, not actually realising. But also, obviously the Labour Party has a massive responsibility, so do social media companies. It's really disgraceful that if someone says something so awful online, it's so difficult for them to get banned or tweets deleted. I've had people say that the most horrible things to me, send me awful pictures. I mean, I know everyone in this panel has as well, and social media companies do absolutely nothing. But obviously, as the Labour Party, as a party that is progressive, we can't just sit back and say that other areas are bad, so that absolves all of us. We have an even greater responsibility to stand up to anti-Semitism within our own ranks.
Thank you. Adam, why should Labour, the left in general, carry more of the can for the increasing problem of anti-Semitism in society?
Because it is the source of increasing anti-Semitism in society right now. Now, I say that both in terms of... I'll stand up anyway, so you can hear me. So the Labour Party has become one of the primary sources for anti-Semitic growth in this country. And the reason for that is this. A culture has developed within a mass membership movement of hostility towards Jews over the past 5 years.
It's still difficult to hear.
It's still difficult to hear me. Can you hear me now? No. Is that better? None of them are working. It's so a culture of hostility has grown in the last 5 years towards Jews, emanating from the Labour Party, a mass membership political party. Now, every single person in this room certainly, but also across the country, will interact with people in the Labour Party, whether it be on street stalls, whether it be canvassers knocking on the door. And you know what? People may ask those canvassers or people on the street stalls, what is this thing about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? What is it? And the problem is a culture has developed in the Labour Party whereby the default reaction of many people in the Labour Party to that, too many people, perhaps even a majority of activists, is it's a smear. Those Jews are making it up. And if that allows it to spread, because the Labour Party speak to tens of thousands of people every single week. And this stuff is in the press, and therefore canvassers will be asked about this stuff. And canvassers' responses will not necessarily be, well, the Jewish community have serious points, and actually our responsibility is to listen to them. Because that is not the reaction I've heard from people knocking on doors. Like, even during the general election last year in Hendon, Jewish people were challenging canvassers who came in from beyond Barnet, but many from within Barnet, and they got asked this. And some activists, too many activists, their response was, it is smears. That people take political parties' word as truth, especially if you are a partisan Labour voter. You trust what the Labour Party says. When I'm wearing a red rosette and I tell you something about the Labour Party, you trust me because I'm wearing that red rosette and I'm a representative of that political party. That is how this thing is spreading, and that's why the Labour Party has to take responsibility for it. Now, that culture, it was never intended. I do not believe that Mike or Jeremy Corbyn intended for that culture to be created in 2015. I do not believe their intent was to be anti-Semitic. But it has developed over the last few years because they had gone into a bunker mentality. I think that's absolutely spot on. They came to believe that these attacks were purely made up by the right-wing press, by Labour MPs who are hostile to Jeremy Corbyn, and perhaps by right-wing Jews. And their complete and utter rejection of that has allowed this to spread, and their unwillingness to take it seriously. And I say that as someone who has had meetings with the highest levels of the Labour Party over the last 5 years. They do not believe it's real. They do not take it seriously. They are disinterested. And I say that having met with Jenny Formby, having met with the previous General Secretary, having met with Jeremy Corbyn, having met with some people around his office and others who are very interested, I should say that clearly. But the problem we have here right now as to why this culture is spreading and cannot be stopped is because the people who do recognise it, perhaps even Mike as well, in fact, Mike does recognise it, the people who do recognise it are powerless to do anything about it because the people at the very top are disinterested and don't believe it.
Do you think, I would slightly follow that up, do you think it is fair to say that the people who are opposed in general to Jeremy Corbyn as leader and the people who are most vociferous in their fight against anti-Semitism, and actually the people who are most anti-Brexit, are all the same people? And is it that the leadership of the party does not want to dismiss them, wants to dismiss them entirely, or does not? Can you separate out the anti-Semitism thing from that? Is what I'm trying to ask.
I think it's made it very. I think it's made it very difficult in that it's not helpful that all these things are bound up together. Like, without a doubt, the Brexit issues, the moderate MPs, it's not helpful. It's simply not. But nonetheless, it is only the leadership of the Labour Party who are trying to make excuses like that these people are all against us, regardless of what it is. I don't think it's the Jewish community who are sort of bundling this all up with Brexit or anything else. People in the Jewish community are saying these things, making their concerns known because they genuinely believe it. And last year, in March last year, for the first time since after the Second World War, when the then Labour government was refusing immigration to Palestine, it's not working again, refusing immigration to Palestine, after the Second World War with Holocaust survivors, that was the last time British Jews took to the streets against a Labour administration of any kind. Last year, the Jewish community took to the streets, and the reaction to that was, I think, just not quite understanding the issue. They didn't understand why people are so angry about this. When what happened last year was of such historical significance for the Jewish community. We're not a bunch of protesters generally. We tend to keep our heads down. We don't campaign against the government generally. We don't campaign against the opposition certainly, and we certainly don't campaign against the Labour Party, which is the party that the Jewish community helped build.
Miriam, let me ask you if it's possible for Labour to separate out that opposition to the left in general, and opposition to anti-Semitism, and opposition to other stuff like Brexit.
I think the fight against anti-Semitism has become almost politicised in a way that it should never have been politicised. It's become like, if you're standing up for things that are really hard left, being like adopting some certain little anti-Semitic views which you should, nothing to do with being hard left, nothing to do with having any sort of view on the far left of politics, becomes sort of like part of discourse and becomes part of the way in which people talk, and that's not acceptable. And I think it has become factionalised. People on all sides of politics, this exists, don't feel welcome and able to call out things from people they respect politically otherwise. And we do actually desperately need to have a situation where people are able to set aside that actually fighting against racism, fighting against all forms of prejudice, hate to use that phrase, but fighting against every single form of prejudice is more important than political factionalism. And that's something that a lot of people, I'm talking about ordinary Labour members, sometimes haven't actually been informed enough about, that actually, I've met people throughout the Labour Party, from the hard left to the soft left to the right, every single bit of it, and I hate those terms to refer to bits of the Labour Party, who are so committed to fighting anti-Semitism, but I've also met people, and I've got abuse from people who are actually incredibly anti-Semitic. And so actually, we need to actually be speaking out, realising that actually your other views on other parts of politics don't matter. What does matter is that you fight against anti-Semitism in the Labour movement, and regardless of what your opinion is on who should be the leader or anything else.
Ella, is that something you agree with?
I think it's really interesting, and something I noticed myself doing whilst running Labour Party anti-Semitism training. Something I noticed myself doing whilst running Labour Party anti-Semitism training was starting by qualifying that I wouldn't vote for Benjamin Netanyahu in an Israeli election. It was one of the first things out of the block that I would say is, I'm Ella and I'm a member of the Labour Party here, and obviously I hate Netanyahu, and etc., the things many of us I imagine will share. And I looked at myself halfway through and thought, why on earth am I doing this? Why am I suddenly a good Jew or a bad Jew because of my views on Israel-Palestine? And I think that's a lot of where it comes down to. And I think, interestingly, what you said about people who have stood up for the Jewish community, what's very interesting is the history of engagement with the Jewish community. So the longer you have been engaged with the Jewish community, the more you understand, the more you are empathetic, which is one of the reasons why we created this training in the first place. But if you look at Mike Gapes, chair of Labour students, working closely with the Union of Jewish Students, you look at Wes Streeting, president of NUS, worked closely with the Union of Jewish Students. You look at John Mann, chair of Labour students, worked closely with the Union of Jewish Students. I will just carry on repping UJS, but it's a very clear pattern of people who stand in solidarity with the Jewish community, the people who understand it, have friends in it. But I don't think it should just be them. It's a point about good faith, and the Labour Party runs on solidarity. It's like an endless fuel. Is that when a Jewish person turns around and says, I have experienced anti-Semitism from a member of the Labour Party, their response should not be, oh, but have you, love? Always quite misogynistic and a little bit patronising. And the amount of times that's happened to so many of us is we have said, and if, I'd say to the same person on a different month, or, I experienced misogyny recently, they go, oh my God, that's outrageous, what can I do to support and help you? It's a completely different paradigm in the fact that anti-Semitism manifests itself very differently to other forms of racism. Racism against people of colour is about treading them down and making them a second-class citizen, whereas anti-Semitism puts Jews on some sort of subversive pedestal with power and controlling the world and the media. So they have to be tackled very differently, and I don't think people look at anti-Semitism and equate it with racism. And the final thing I'll say on this topic is, when I first started, I'm the same as Adam, when I first started the Jewish Labour movement, I sat down in the leader of the opposition's office with his staff and explained precisely the problem that was happening in the Labour Party. We are over 2.5 years later. I've had the same conversation with that office maybe a dozen times, and with Jenny Formby and with everyone else. And the only person who I ever believed was actually doing anything to really tangibly make the difference was Ian McNichol, because he had that history of engagement with the Jewish community and really understood the community. We're not standing against one political party or one political leader. We are crying out and saying we are experiencing racism. For the love of God, help us. And I don't anymore believe that anyone is listening.
Can I stay with you for the next question, which is about working towards resolving this problem, finding a solution? Is it better to stay in the tent, stay in the party and fight, or do you think you should leave?
I don't know. Honestly, my parents here and they can contest this, was pretty much the only topic of conversation over Shabbos dinner last week. I don't know. I've been torn on this for a long time, and for a long time I campaigned in 17 seats in the 2017 general election, and I was so proud of doing that because I felt like I was helping this country. I don't know if I can campaign anymore with good faith, if I can look my family in the eye, if I can look my community in the eye and say I'm doing the right thing. I respect those on both. I have so much respect for Adam, who has stayed completely true to his principles and not wavered a second, because at the end of the day, none of us have changed. None of our values have changed. It's the Labour Party that has made it a place that many of us don't feel welcome in. And the answer the question isn't, is there anti-Semitism or is it not? The question is, are you going to be bullied out or are you going to stay? That's the only question.
Miriam, what does it mean to you to hear something like that?
So I think it says a lot about the situation that we're in, that Jewish members who should belong in the Labour Party, in the Labour movement, no longer feel able to ally themselves with it. I am quite outspoken about my desire to stay in the Labour Party, although I'd like to add that I have absolutely no disrespect for anyone who feels like they're able to leave, especially Jewish members. Like, if Jewish members feel they're unable to leave, unable to stay in the Labour Party, that's not their fault, that's shame on the Labour Party. The reason why I want to stay and fight is because I feel that if all of the voices in the Labour movement leave who care about anti-Semitism, then only anti-Semitic voices remain. There's no one left to stand and shout against it. And I don't think this obligation should just sit with Jewish members. Like, Jewish members, if you're facing anti-Semitism every single day, every time I open up my Twitter, there's probably pretty much an anti-Semitic message there. I can understand why you'd want to leave, because for your mental health, for your well-being, that's impossible. But for non-Jewish members, it really, really upsets me and it makes me quite angry, actually, when non-Jewish members leave the Labour Party and protest anti-Semitism, because I feel like they're leaving me all alone and that I'm going to be the only one left now. Or obviously there's lots of amazing comrades across the Labour Party who still care about fighting anti-Semitism, but it feels like it feels like being abandoned. Like, if I can put up with horrendous abuse for existing on the left as a Jewish woman, then non-Jewish people who don't experience that and aren't affected by it, or will be affected by it but don't receive it, I also feel like they can also stay and stand in solidarity with us. And I feel like we have to challenge, we have to keep fighting, but also I completely respect comrades who feel like they have to leave, and that's not their fault.
Mike, as someone who wants to stay, I'm
Yes.
assuming, what do you make of that argument? Is the line that stark now between people who are against anti-Semitism and people who are anti-Semites in the Labour Party? Here's the mic, sorry.
Yes, so what was the question? Where's that?
So Miriam said that she wants people who are not Jews to stay in the Labour Party,
Yes.
rather than to resign in protest against anti-Semitism. Is the line that clear? Are there only now people who are against anti-Semitism and anti-Semites in the Labour Party?
No, and maybe that's a problem. Maybe the ideal situation is you find ourselves at a point where there are a small number of anti-Semites and a large number of people vehemently fighting it. I don't think we're there. I think the vast majority of Labour members are, considering that 550, 600,000 membership, are disinterested and disengaged with the problem. And we've seen that. And that's not, again, just because of the Labour Party. If you look at polling shows lots of people think the Labour Party, lots of people who aren't Jewish, think the Labour Party is endemically anti-Semitic, and yet are still going to vote for it. Now, we often ignore that fact, but that's the real problem to my mind. I think the problem is the vast chunk of Labour members don't spend their lives engaged in either the Jewish community or Labour Party politics, and therefore jump onto Twitter every now and then and watch the news, and this just comes and goes. So no, I don't think the line is that clear, but I certainly think, considering the size of the membership, and then even if you don't agree with the figures or don't believe the figures that Jenny Formby put out, which I've been looking through again today, it's a tiny proportion of that mass membership of people who have been accused of anything, let alone found to have done something. I don't think it's a matter of getting up and walking away, for me. A few other things just to pick up on what was said earlier. One of the things I thought was really interesting about, I can't remember if it was Ella or Adam who mentioned this sort of good Jew, bad Jew. It was Ella. And I certainly believe that people who claim to be on the left, and I don't believe you're on the left if you are anti-Semitic in any way, are guilty of that. But I also think our community is guilty of that. I myself see that happening from people within the Jewish community who are insulting, who are offensive, sometimes vehemently so, towards myself and lots of other people who are Jewish and who wish to remain in the Labour Party, who for whom progressive values are very important. I think we need to check ourselves sometimes, not to compare and not to say that one is as bad as the other, but to realise that I'll say this, I was so surprised at some of the ways that I've been spoken to online by senior people in our community, but both religious leaders, people in the Jewish press, and I don't know why, and it baffles me. It baffles me that they think that level of vitriol and personal abuse is acceptable, especially given the fact that they make so much of how abuse is bad, how we need to be kinder to each other. And that's something I find quite a lot, and I think we sometimes don't realise it, that we are, not in this room necessarily, but are guilty of that too. Like, my membership of the Labour Party and my determination to stay in it is because I genuinely believe that at the moment, and I think I will do for a long time, it's the best place to be to fight for a more progressive society. And the fact that other people think it's acceptable to lay into you, to be abusive to you for that, certainly from within the Jewish community, I find incredibly upsetting. I want to pick up on the question of whether it's feasible to delineate between people who are leaving because of anti-Semitism or leaving because of other reasons. So I watched the press conference this week of the independent group when 6 Labour MPs, or 7 Labour MPs?
No,
8
now. 7 Labour MPs walked away. And I caught myself thinking, how should I talk about this? I had to file a story for GQ, I had to write a piece for The Guardian the next day. I genuinely believe Luciana Berger left the Labour Party because of anti-Semitism. I don't think she has said that she thinks the vast majority of Labour members are anti-Semites, but she clearly felt that she couldn't remain in the party. She made that decision, and I have to respect it. I don't think Chuka Umunna left the Labour Party because of anti-Semitism. I don't think he's trying to pretend he did so. And I think the same is true, I'm afraid to say, for a fair few of those Labour MPs. It may have been a background reason, it may have been one of the reasons they sort of considered, but it certainly wasn't the primary one, and they made that case themselves on that stage in that press conference room. And so I found myself trying to understand how I should talk about that. Because on the one hand I wanted to say, yes, Luciana Berger left because of anti-Semitism, that's really bad. I also think Chuka Umunna is a chancer who wants to lead his own party, and also, frankly, that Chuka Umunna doesn't have the same politics as Jeremy Corbyn or the mass membership of the Labour Party, as we've seen being announced. So, I guess that my point of raising that, I guess, is that...
Speak a bit slower.
Of course, yeah, sorry.
Actually, quite a bit slower.
Sure, I can try. I'm trying to fit a lot in. Simply, my point was that I think it is hard sometimes to understand and to work out how to speak about people within the Labour Party who are criticising Corbyn, or in this case leaving the Labour Party, when they clearly have multiple intentions for doing so, and happily admit that themselves, which I think is what happened with Chuka this week. I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about, which I haven't really touched upon yet, but it's something that I'm grappling with still, and being in this room surrounded by, I'm assuming, mostly Jewish people, I want to present as a question. I'm still learning about my relationship to my religion and to my politics and how they intersect, both looking at history, but also looking at how our community operates and how we exist. Ella's totally right. It's not the responsibility of any Jewish person to stand up in a room and say what their politics are on Israel, because they are separate things. To my mind, my politics about the state of Israel, which have changed vastly from the days when I was at B'nai Akiva, through to my days at Sussex University, and I was surrounded by a whole different crowd, to where I am now, where I'm kind of getting in touch again with my Jewish roots and heritage, spending more time with my family, reading more. My position on Israel has changed, and it continuously changes. But the one thing I'm certain of, and I will ensure that I'm always certain of, is that my politics on Israel and my political position on that very real, very present situation have to be kept separate from my faith and my religion and my culture. And I think we all talk about that as a community, and I would never say this, I should add, outside of a room like this. But we need to do that. It's incredibly important, and most of us would say that's why when you walk into a room with someone who's Jewish, it's not your responsibility to say your politics on Israel, because they're not the same thing. And I feel like, again, yeah, I'll say this. I feel like as a community, we aren't good at that. We aren't good at that delineation that we demand of other people. We expect non-Jewish people, some of whom will never or have never interacted meaningfully with someone who they know to be Jewish, and we expect them to really unpick these very complex parts of our identities. And then I open the newspaper and read an article from the chief rabbi in the Telegraph where he basically says to be Jewish and to be a Zionist and support the state of Israel are one and the same. And that's not to lay the blame on his feet or any of ours. But I think one of the things that we as a community can do, separate from the anti-Semitism point, is to think carefully about how we speak about our identities, both religious and political, not to excuse the mistakes made by others, whether they be meaningfully offensive or accidentally because they're ignorant. But I think we can do better at that, and I hope that's something we can learn to do.
Ella,
Can I just
yes,
come back
please,
on
go
a
in.
couple of those points? I haven't come to an opinion on what you have on Chucker's resignation, but specifically he said in his speech that he joined the Labour Party because he believed it to be anti-racist. And if Chucker, like Luciana, believes the Labour Party to be institutionally anti-Semitic, surely he is standing up for his own values of anti-racism by leaving, being Jewish or being not. And the other thing I don't think we've thought about as a group is anti-Semitism has been in the press every week for 2.5 years. It has, quite frankly, been tiring to read so much anti-Semitism. But if every Labour Party member, not all 500,000 of them will be reading the papers every week, but I have seen pretty much every single type of anti-Semitism that has existed, from the medieval Christian blood libel right the way through to modern day, where comments and critiques on Israel have moved into anti-Semitism. But the whole range. I no longer believe that people are naive about anti-Semitism because every single type of anti-Semitism has been documented and the Board of Deputies have given a comment on every single one. Not that the Board of Deputies maybe has always got it right. Certainly I think some of the things that have been said about you may have come from quarters like that or close to those, and they are wrong obviously, but I no longer believe in this unwillful blind spot because everything has been explained time and time and time again. And it's got to the point where I believe personally that some people, not the majority of Labour Party members, and there are some brilliant, fantastic Labour Party members out there who have supported all of us through some of the worst times we will have had in the party, but I no longer believe that there is a blind spot. I believe it is a willful blind spot.
Do you mean that about the leadership? Just to ask, do you mean
No, I believe that in the
society?
board of memberships, when people are saying things like what you were saying about the member who was calling Emma Weissel a Zionist bitch, I no longer believe that it won't even cross their mind that could be anti-Semitic because they've seen it so many times in so many revolving door cases of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
Can I develop this with you, Mike, a little bit, because you've written about it today? What does the Labour Party need to do to put this situation right?
So to my mind, there are two separate areas that need to be worked on. The first is the disciplinary process internally, which deals with these issues. And the second is kind of the bigger picture politics. To deal with the internal thing quickly, because I know there was talk of numbers earlier this month when Jenny Formby wrote a letter, which I'm sure most of us were all over. My issue with the disciplinary process, having spent the last few days engaging with it, in short, is that it's not particularly fit for purpose. And not just in terms of anti-Semitism, just more broadly. It wasn't designed at a time in the social media age when there was access to this many things people were doing. It wasn't designed for an organisation of this size. The other problem, and I don't want to get too detailed here, but I think it's important we talk about it, is that the body that oversees the most serious cases of anti-Semitism and other forms of abuse that appear in the party is just dysfunctional. Not because it doesn't take anti-Semitism seriously, it's just a body that doesn't do anything else. It meets not regularly enough. Until very recently it was far too small, so it just didn't work. So I've made a suggestion of what I think should happen, which is on the Guardian today, which in short is to streamline that process, have an independent staff investigation by Labour Party staff, as is done now. They come to some conclusions, and that's passed to an independent panel of lawyers to make a decision. Whether we like it or not, not every instance of anti-Semitism that's reported is anti-Semitism. Like Margaret Hodges' examples the other day, 200 she submitted, which understandably, she didn't commit them, submitted 200 examples of anti-Semitism, and that made headlines, and that was, truly awful. Turns out only, I think, 130, to get the numbers right, we're talking loudly. Basically, about 20 of those people were members, and she said it was over 200, which she may have believed. So it's important that process is streamlined, and there's more transparency, so we know exactly what's going on. I've also asked that the Examples of how decisions are made are published, so we know what punishment is handed out for what. I don't think someone who retweets something that has an anti-Semitic image of it inherently needs to be suspended from the Labour Party straight away, depending on circumstance. I think we need to look into what happened, what they know. So I think there's transparency there, speed there, and reform internally. That's only half of the issue, right? Because even if that happens, that doesn't repair relations and doesn't deal with the politics. So my answer is twofold. There's been a breakdown of relationships between the community and its organisations and the Labour Party. To my mind, the Labour Party is going to be the next government, whether the Jewish community and the Labour Party repair those relations or not. I would like to see that happen for everyone's sake. So to that end, I have suggested that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell or their team hold a town hall style event at a progressive Jewish community where they listen and they talk and they start that process of learning and building bridges. That's my first suggestion. My second suggestion is that meetings are held between the community organisations and the Labour leadership behind closed doors to start talking about what can be done. I hope in some way that starts to repair those relationships. I also think that one of the issues has been around political education. We've talked about it a lot in the last few years, but very little has been done. And there's an impasse that has been reached because community organisations don't have the level of trust in the Labour Party, so they don't believe them, they don't trust them to conduct them properly. And the Labour Party have basically said, well, we don't want to develop a political education programme without the buy-in from the Jewish community because we'll be accused of whitewashing it, which is true. And so I made a suggestion today that the Labour Party use existing resources like the one that Yad Vashem has produced, the online course, to start rolling that out. You can never learn too much about racism, so even if people in that community, in those constituencies know enough already, teach them more. And I think on top of that, we need to see people like Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell publicly showing themselves going on a journey of understanding, sitting down on films for difficult conversations, being present in those spaces.
Just on your point about Twitter and the internet, are you saying that people who tweet or retweet examples of anti-Semitism should be ignored or left alone?
No, not at all. I just think it's circumstantial. So I think if you tweet Jews are bad, you should be kicked out of the Labour Party. If you tweet something that is clearly a symbol of offensive anti-Semitic material, which you know to be anti-Semitic, boot you out of the party. I think if you retweet something, I mean, Nash Shah's a good example of this. I remember this a few years ago. She shared some things which I genuinely believe from meeting her behind closed doors, she didn't understand to be anti-Semitic. I don't think that you should be written off for all eternity. I think that's just how it should be, because else, what's the point of being a progressive organisation if you don't allow people to learn and go on journeys? Like, my views today are not the same views I held when I was younger. I'm sure I said racist things when I was a kid and didn't know better. And if we haven't got space to teach people and to bring them with us, then there is literally no point in us doing this.
Miriam, you hold a position within the Labour Party. Is it realistic that what Mike suggests can be achieved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a matter of people wanting to make some quite difficult decisions, and often ones which might be unpopular with some people. I think a lot of what Mike talks about broadly is very, very sensible. Things like making the disciplinary process more transparent, more accountable, more professionalised, less politicised. I mean, if you were looking at a workplace environment or something, if you put in a complaint to HR about being racially abused, you wouldn't expect not to hear anything. You wouldn't expect to not have your case answered. So we really do need to really buck up our ideas when it comes to our disciplinary procedures, but also we need to let people like the Jewish Labour movement into the room and actually listen to the things that are being said and actually act on them, because too often it feels like members of the Jewish community and the Jewish Labour movement are putting forward these really well thought out recommendations about what we need to do, and nothing really happens. And hopefully that's not from a position of malice, but we do really need to be taking that seriously and rolling out things like JLM training throughout the country in every CLP. There's no reason why that cannot be delivered, and resources that are there can't be given to the JLM. And a massive listening exercise as well, whereby actually instead of talking about what we believe what non-Jews within the Labour Party believe anti-Semitism to be, actually listening to the Jewish community and engaging with all the different facets, because we don't all think the same thing within the Jewish Labour Party, the Jewish community. I know it's very easy to sometimes talk to bits of the community that agree with us and talk to ourselves, but we need to have an active exercise of talking to all the different groups and different representative bits. Does that answer the question?
It does, and I can put it to Adam now, as someone who's recently left the party but who has had conversations at its highest levels. Is it realistic to say make the disciplinary process less politicised?
No.
Why not?
It's not, because the processes are corrupted beyond redemption. They cannot be fixed. And they cannot be fixed because there are people at the very top of the Labour Party who basically take their mates out of the system. When there are people who are their mates, who are in the system, who are facing disciplinary procedures, their files get pulled out. There are certain people in Jeremy Corbyn's office who are bullies. They are absolute bullies. And the system cannot be fixed. Now, I want to come back on Mike's point around process. This isn't around process. He's entirely correct. The processes are not fit for purpose. They're not fit for purpose. The numbers that were released last week were hugely misleading. So, for example, when they announced that 12 people have been expelled, I've seen how long these things take to work through the system. These cases take a year to get through the system. Now, those people who were expelled must have been pre-April 2018 cases. Okay. Now, the Labour Party are at the same time claiming that they had never categorised the anti-Semitism cases pre-April 2018. Like it is completely disingenuous for the party to say they simply don't know what cases there were pre-April 2018 that were anti-Semitic. There are thousands. Now, in terms of process, like I said, the system is corrupted. My colleague Peter Mason, who's the National Secretary of the Jewish Labour Movement, tonight tweeted out a job advert that went out in April 2018 to recruit 9 governance officers. In February 2018, to recruit 9 governance officers whose sole purpose would have been to sift through these cases of anti-Semitism. Now, the current General Secretary, in her previous role as chair of the National Executive Committee, pulled those adverts. So therefore, those staff were not recruited a year ago to start sifting through these cases, because to start sifting through these cases would have meant that certain people who were close to Labour leadership would have been expelled from the Labour Party. Now, talking about how we fix, processes are broken. This is a cultural problem. This is a problem across the Labour Party. Members of the Labour Party have become radicalised against Jews. And it wasn't the intention, like I said, but too many people have become radicalised against Jews. Now, when you've got a cultural problem like this, a cultural problem of racism, the only way to stamp it out is absolute zero tolerance. Because if you have absolute zero tolerance, even one single muttering of anti-Jew hatred should result in immediate expulsion. Because that is the only way to get this sickness out of the Labour Party, out of perhaps the next government. Education, yeah, it's important, I agree. I think there are a lot of people who have never met Jews, but this is a cultural sickness that's infected all parts of the party. Now,
Adam, what do you achieve by doing that? What do you achieve by taking people who live in our communities up and down the country and booting them out the one place where they could potentially learn more about what it means to be racist? Like, I don't mean vehement anti-Semites. I mean people who retweet something they didn't realise was anti-Semitic in the first place.
So, at first, I would have agreed with you. I used to believe that everyone, we should try and make sure we educate everyone. We should spend enormous resources in doing that. But the problem is now so grave and so deep that actually a message has to be sent to the Labour Party membership that if you are anti-Semitic, then there is no place for you in this party. And the only way to achieve that in the interim, not in the long term, in the interim, is to say we will take a zero-tolerance approach. Any uttering of Jew hatred, even if it's disguised under the word Zionism or Zionist, means you're out. You're out for 5 years. And actually, when you want to come back, you've got to show, actually, you understand this now. Now, alongside that, I think there doesn't need to be, there is a place for education, but I don't think the Labour Party need to have these people inside of our party for the moment. I want to come back on one point around Jeremy Corbyn doing a listening exercise. Now, I think in your article you wrote today that he should come and speak to the Jewish Labour Movement extraordinary meeting as to whether or not they're going to affiliate or disaffiliate. He should. He won't. Because every single experience I've had of face-to-face contact with Jeremy is he does not have the emotional capacity to handle this. He simply doesn't. Either because he's blinded by what's going on, doesn't really understand it, or because he's complicit in it and he feels guilt. One of the two, but he won't do it. And I think you know that. I know that. I think Ella knows that. Miriam probably knows that, and Adam, I think, will know that as well. So welcome, Adam.
Adam, thank you. Let's just welcome our fifth panellist, Adam Wagner, who is unfortunately late, but thank you very much for no, that's fine. Thank you very much for making it. I'm about to open the floor to some questions. Adam, do you want to just take the opportunity that I gave all the other panellists at the start to explain your relationship with the Labour Party very briefly and how it makes anti-Semitism an important issue for you?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I don't stand up?
No.
Or do you want me to?
No.
First of all, well, thank you for having me, but also I'm so sorry for being so late. I'm so sorry for being so late. I was let out of court in Coventry at 6 o'clock, so I've got a reasonable reason. I'm looking at the panel. I think I'm probably the least connected to the Labour Party of this group. I've never really been that political in my activities. I'm a barrister. I am a former socialist. That's my fourth connection. I was the head of Havod and Draw, which is the Jewish socialist youth movement. So I sometimes think to myself, as people are calling me an evil Tory Blairite capitalist, that I'm probably the only one of any in this conversation who's lived on a commune for a year. But there it is. I got involved in this issue really about a year ago because I felt like, from my perspective as somebody who considered myself on the left and also someone who has had experience of this kind of slightly crazy socialist environment, but through a different lens, I felt quite a lot of sympathy for the Corbyn movement when it arose, or the movement that arose around Corbyn. And I didn't see it as sort of as crazy and alien as I think quite a lot of people in the Jewish community did from a political perspective. And I quite respected, especially the younger end of the movement. It looked really exciting and progressive and interesting. So I felt like and on the other hand, I've professionally got a lot of experience of, I guess, institutional change. And I've acted in quite a lot of public inquiries. I'm a human rights lawyer. I do a lot of discrimination law. And I felt like I had a perspective to add from a Jewish perspective, but also from a human rights perspective. And that seemed to be a reasonable place to start from. And I got involved, started to get involved last spring, when, and mainly through Twitter, really just starting to pass the issues and try and add a bit of balance to, and a bit less emotion, as I saw it, to the issues. And it really progressed from there. And I feel like my views on the situation have changed very significantly over that time, because I very deliberately and as a strategy from my own perspective, I very deliberately tried to be open to an interpretation of the way the people within the Labour Party were acting, which was positive and which was as open as possible to the idea that everybody was trying to do the best they could. Maybe people were coming from different political perspectives. Maybe there's an element of extreme passion over Israel-Palestine that was clouding people's judgment on both sides. And to be frank, over this last year or so, I've come to a pretty firm conclusion, as I'm guessing, although I haven't heard, but I know that people sitting to my left, that things are really quite bad within the Labour movement. I quite strongly believe now that there is an institutional racism problem, and very much focused on the way that Macpherson in the Stephen Lawrence inquiry defined it, and I can go into that. But and I think that it's getting to the point where it's looking to be intractable, which is a very sad thing to say, but I think it's true.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's hear some questions from some of you. I've got a short list. Helen Goldhill, is Helen here? Hi, Helen. What's your question, please?
Hi. I know Michael already answered this earlier in the debate, but to the whole panel, do you think Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic, and how would you clarify that?
Ella.
Oh, crap. I believe that the Labour Party is institutionally anti-Semitic, and I hadn't come to this decision before I saw Luciana say it. And I think Luciana, certainly to my peers and my generation of young women activists in the Jewish community, she's a hero. And she has been, this is not the first time she's had to resign because of racism in a political party. And I watched the press conference, I sat there and thought, well, if Luciana thinks it, she knows better than me. She's much more intelligent, she's much more experienced. So, but at the end of the day, I think Adam can answer the legal case on it, but I have seen no will to try and change it, and that's when it becomes an institutional problem, when it's at every level of the Labour Party.
But that's a problem for the party. The question was about the leader.
Great. I don't think that Jeremy Corbyn is a classic anti-Semite who wakes up in the morning, thinks I hate Jews. I think he has allowed anti-Semitism to flourish within the party, as I've said before. I think he has presided over a regime in the Labour Party where Jews no longer feel safe, no longer feel welcome or comfortable within the party. And obviously some do, but for the vast majority, I think they would say they do not. And I think that has to sit on his conscience, and whether that makes him anti-Semite, I don't want to be the person to say that, but I think he has a lot to answer to.
Okay, Mike, what about you? Do you think Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite?
No, I don't. Won't surprise everyone.
Can you use the microphone, please?
Yes, sure. I'll put it here. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite. I think that the Labour Party has not done well at dealing with anti-Semitism in the last few years. And the reason I have, as I said before, not sympathy with that is that I myself have gone on a journey of understanding as a Jewish person as to what anti-Semitism on the left is. I remember very clearly writing a piece in 2015, kind of dismissing it, because it's not something I'd experienced or understood. And so, I guess, because I have that in the back of my mind, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to the idea that Jeremy Corbyn and the people around him were also blind and ignorant to it. And especially given they themselves, mostly not being Jewish, don't experience it, probably aren't spending their days scrolling through Twitter at my mentions or others' mentions, and so on.
Oi.
I understand to some extent there's the capacity there for it to not have been understood. I think the real test is now, and I think after Luciana's leaving of the party, which I think is an unignorable moment of hopefully change, is to whether they take formative and affirmative action to do something. I disagree with Adam that I think the will, from the conversations I have on a fairly regular basis, is there. There's a genuine desire to deal with this, both because I think people in the Labour leadership office aren't anti-Semites and don't want to be associated with them, but also because, practically speaking, this is potentially going to stop a transformative Labour government coming into power. And so there's a genuine desire to achieve that.
Does that lack of understanding extend to Jeremy Corbyn himself making Facebook comments underneath a picture of a mural of bankers,
yeah,
or of saying that Zionists don't have a sense of humour?
Yeah, I mean, let's deal with the mural, because that's like an obvious example to me. Clearly, that mural is anti-Semitic. It's gross. I wrote a piece describing that and accusing Jeremy Corbyn of being blind to anti-Semitism when he did so. I guess the position I come from is that, as I said earlier, I think we have to understand that people go on journeys of understanding. That was a really poor use of language. People learn and they grow and they change. So a prime example I'd give is that Theresa, I'm gay and I'm Jewish, and Theresa May voted to keep Section 28, a law that basically was explicitly prejudicial to LGBT people, when she was a member of Parliament. And now she is allowed to be, and I think it's fairly reasonable if she believes it, to be an avid supporter of LGBT rights and say that she really cares. And I don't know if maybe I believe that, I don't know, maybe she has gone on a journey. And so, to my mind, if Jeremy Corbyn had got up wearing Jeremy Corbyn had done something that was explicitly violent to Jewish people, I would be much less willing to believe that he has better understood anti-Semitism now than oversights like that which are non-defensible, but also, to my mind, can be understood in that context.
Okay. Anyone else on the panel think that any anti-Semitism of Jeremy Corbyn personally extends beyond a lack of understanding?
Yes.
I give that.
Go on.
Yes. He is an anti-Semite, but he doesn't realise he is. He is a proud anti-racist.
Well, that is a lack of understanding, then, isn't it?
But he believes in Jewish conspiracies. That I believe, but he doesn't recognise that to be anti-Semitism. He believes that Jonathan Friedland, someone I greatly admire, is part of a conspiracy to smear him. He believes that not only does he write nasty articles, but he writes subliminally nasty articles. Now that line in the Vice documentary got me. So I'm not sure if everyone watched that Vice documentary last year, but he specifically used the word subliminal about Jonathan Friedland's writing, and that word stuck with me because he's in that. Unlike lots of journalists write nasty things about Jeremy Corbyn. Lots of journalists, especially at that time, loads of journalists.
They still do it now.
And they still do it now. But that word about the idea that he was somehow underhand about how he was doing it, solely Jonathan Friedland's, that stuck with me and still sticks with me today. Again, in the same documentary, he was being interviewed by Ben Ferguson from Vice, and it was a perfectly delightful conversation. Ben Ferguson was a Jeremy Corbyn supporter, and Ken Livingstone was delivered the news about Ken Livingstone's touring of the studios about Hitler, and he suddenly just went angry. What's Ken done wrong? He couldn't see it, had no idea about why Ken Livingstone, who is an anti-Semite, I say categorically, could not understand why people were upset about Ken Livingstone ranting about Hitler, baiting the Jewish community. And those two things made me realise that I used to believe it was a blind spot. I now believe he believes in Jewish conspiracies, whether he dresses up as a Zionist or not. And since then, every single time I've sat down with him, and there's been a few times, the moment you mention anti-Semitism, he switches off. He's just completely disinterested. He doesn't want to talk about it because he doesn't believe it. He believes it's a smear.
Adam Wagner, Jeremy Corbyn, conspiracy theorist or anti-racist?
I still don't really know. I don't know the guy. I'm very cautious of calling anybody racist or anti-Semitic. First of all, I think that racism is something which exists in everybody, and I think there is pretty much nobody who can examine the depths of their heart and their entire life and think, I have never thought a racist thought or done a racist thing.
You just have to make a little closer.
Sorry? Oh, sorry about that. I think there's an element of that. I think, to paraphrase Forrest Gump, I prefer to think of it as anti-Semitism is as anti-Semitism does. And really you've just got to look at people's actions and say, well, are you complicit? Are you a perpetrator? Are you deliberately ignoring things? And I think with Corbyn, he has a very significant case to answer now. And I thought the same as Michael. I guess I'm just a few months ahead of Michael, maybe, or maybe Michael will never get there on that journey. I thought that Jeremy Corbyn could go on a journey. I believe anybody can go on a journey. But it's getting to a point. I mean, he's 69 years old. He's been 3 years at the head of the Labour Party. Things seem to be getting worse and not better, and they're getting worse in quite a structural way, and quite a way which you cannot. It's not just the kind of sort of. I hear the defenders of the Labour Party say, well, we've just dealt with it too slowly, or not dealt, we could have done with it better. But I think there's been a lot of deliberate actions now that may have made it worse. So, I don't know, anti-Semitism is as anti-Semitism does.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to get to a few more questions. Edie Friedman, is Edie here? Hi, Edie.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Given that there's obviously a problem of anti-Semitism within the Conservative Party, let alone Islamophobia, would it be a useful idea to get our community to work with other communities to make sure that all forms of racism are dealt with within their respective parties, and that all parties are seen to have transparent, clear policies to deal with it, and not just focus on the Labour Party.
Is this something that should go beyond the Labour Party? Does it go beyond the Labour Party? Adam?
Yes. It does, and thank you, Edie, and I'm a huge admirer of yours. Before we start, yes, of course it does, and like there is a reason why the Jewish community has an affinity with the Labour Party, and that is because of structural racism in the Conservative Party, and that hasn't gone away. There clearly are deeply racist parts of the Conservative Party, but that's not the question here. And that's not what this panel is about, and that's not why people took the streets last year, and that's not why people are questioning whether or not they can remain in the country. So you're right. We should be working with everyone. We should be working with other faiths to tackle racism in the Conservative Party, and also perhaps in the Labour Party. You know, like Islamophobia exists in the Labour Party as well.
Just let Edie come back on that.
Well, just to say that I would see this as part of a solution. I mean, I don't want to say a solution, but it's part of something that can be done that's positive. So I think it is something that the panel needs to address.
Miriam, do you think it can be done that way on a cross-party interfaith? I hesitate to say tea and samosas kind of basis, but what do you think?
So I think definitely there's a space, and a really important space, for working alongside people who are victims of other kind of prejudice. And actually, one thing that I found when I faced anti-Semitism is often the people who are the first to speak out are my comrades who are Muslim, who are people of colour, who are LGBT, and I think there's something about people who also experience a form of racism who understand what it is like, and it's not a factional thing in that case. I remember during my election, as young Labour chair, I got some horrific anti-Semitic abuse. One of the first people who messaged me was the chair of the Labour Muslim Network. Now I get messages from some fantastic comrades who are Muslim, and I feel like if hatred affects them, it affects me, and it is important that we stand together as communities. And I think it's quite a powerful tool actually, because there are some people who understand Islamophobia. I'm not talking about Muslim people, I'm talking about people who are white, for instance, and not actually Muslim, white Christians or something, who might understand Islamophobia but not understand anti-Semitism, and don't understand if you swap the prejudice for another prejudice, it's not okay. And I think working with other faiths and other groups actually is a really powerful tool that we should be using. As to working with the Tories, yes, it's important, but I don't want people to actually hide behind the excuse that things are worse or different in the Tories, because just because it's bad there doesn't mean that we are absolved, because as progressives, we should actually be the better people.
Organisations like the Muslim Council of Britain, for example, would argue that Islamophobia in the Conservative Party is a going concern.
It's a massive issue. Shame on the Tories. It's also a massive issue in the Labour Party, I have no doubt. It's a massive issue throughout society, and we can't shy away from that. And I actually think one thing that makes me really happy is actually the amount of friendship and support that come from organisations that actually speak out about Islamophobia towards the Jewish community as well. Because when we stand together, we are even stronger.
Mike?
Yeah, but I disagree with Adam. I think it's incredibly important we see it in that joined up way. Primarily because, and this is what I was sort of trying to get to earlier when I questioned you about like what benefit what do we achieve by booting people out even if they didn't understand or know, is that the Labour Party isn't the sum total of British society. And people go to Labour, if they're in the Labour Party, they may go to a meeting once a week, they may go never. But that's not people's daily lives. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that taking anti-Semitism seriously in the Labour Party is, to my mind, in secondary to taking anti-Semitism seriously in our society more broadly. Like, what benefit do we have if we boot people out of the Labour Party, but it continues to fester in other places, in people's workplaces, in their community centres, in their homes? And so, I firstly don't think it's about tackling anti-Semitism just in Labour, but looking at what we do as a society more broadly. And the only serious type of anti-racism is one that is linked up with other forms of anti-racism. Like, you can't defeat anti-Semitism without seeing how it relates directly to Islamophobia. I would say the same to anti-black racism or anything else. And the thing that does really, I said this earlier, the thing that really gets me is I don't believe the Labour Party is intrinsically anti-Semitic, but according to polling, a lot of people do. and a lot of them are still willing to vote for the Labour Party. That's my concern.
Okay, thank you. Yes, of course, Adam. Sorry, let me pass the mic.
I'm also a great admirer of ED, but I'm going to disagree with you in a certain way. So I agree with you, and I agree with Michael, that there is a general anti-Semitism issue that needs to be looked at, and it goes together with all forms of hatred. But I think that the Labour Party has a very specific and a very serious problem with anti-Semitism. And it's unique to the Labour Party. It really is. It doesn't only exist in the Labour Party, but for whatever reason, the Labour Party has developed a really serious institutional problem, which is around, you can draw a circle around it, and it is a specific problem that needs to be dealt with. And not in a dissimilar way to the Metropolitan Police Service have developed a very serious problem with anti-black racism, which was the purpose of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. Nobody said to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry to the government, look, we'll do the Met Police, but we've got to also do St Bart's Hospital, because they've got a problem with racism. And at the same time, we need to do, the Tory Party. Because, and that because there was a specific problem with the police specific factors that needed to be dealt with and that needed an intervention. And the Labour Party is in the same position now. And I think as morally correct as it is to say that racism is a general prejudice in everybody, as I said, I don't think that attitude is going to help solve this problem, which is very specific to the Labour Party.
So can I just jump in? So a question. So I found the Margaret Hodge stuff about the number of cases she reported, and I want to bring it up again because I'm interested in how you would engage with that, because you say it's a Labour Party specific problem. She found 200 cases she put forward to the Labour Party and has continued to tweet about how bad that is, and it sounds awful, and that is awful if 200 people are anti-Semitic. It turned out, and I'm just getting the numbers up here, it referred to 111 specific individuals, of whom only 20 were Labour members. Just to see this as a Labour Party problem, when even in those examples, and it's hard to quantify because we don't know, but that's a specific case, where only less than a fifth of the people Margaret Hodge found online being anti-Semitic were Labour members. It doesn't make the case that it's not Labour's problem, it's a societal problem more broadly. And yes, there's people in Labour, we need to deal with it, but to take that away from the bigger issue, to me, just feels like a disservice.
Adam, do you think that's right?
It's not. It is a Labour-specific problem, but it's not a Labour member-specific problem. So it is the people who have JC4PM in their hashtags. It's the people who have GTTO, get the Tories out in their Twitter bios. It's people who are posting absolute filth in the Labour Party forums, and they do this because, like, when you join the Labour Party forum, you join it because you're probably a supporter of the Labour Party. Like, this is a cultural problem that didn't exist 5 years ago in any major meaningful way.
But just to come in, with registered supporters and a genuinely large mass membership party, why shouldn't those people be Labour Party members?
Sorry.
Are you saying that most people who have GTTO hashtags or whatever are nothing to do with the party? Or?
No, I'm saying precisely the opposite. I'm saying that they are supporters of the party, and this is why it goes to the very top, I think, because they look to Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party. They take his lead, whether they're a member of the Labour Party or not. Now, those who are members of the Labour Party need to go for disciplinary processes, absolutely. Those who are outside the Labour Party, who are perhaps inspired by what they see, or take their lead from what I think to be silent dog whistles, that actually it's okay to be anti-Semitic in certain ways, that can only be fixed by leadership at the very top, being incessant about how this is wrong. And we don't really get that, we get silence.
Thank you. Can we come to a question from John Heidemann? John?
Have the mic.
Yes, sorry, we'll just wait until the mic reaches you.
I turned it off.
Oh, did it?
Thank you. And this is particularly a week which I think has seen really fire news, both for Miriam and for Michael on TV and Miriam on social media, which I think both are a form of anti-Semitism and both just as well. I hope most people feel that. So my question is, what can we do both inside and outside of the Jewish community to take at least some of the heat out of this debate, and so that we can foster an open and constructive dialogue that might actually produce some change in people's views and some kind of resolution to the problem.
Anyone? Ella?
I think that's a really important question that is actually very much backed up by data. So if you look at the statistics from the Community Security Report in their 2018 Antisemitism report, for a start, it's the highest year on record. It's the first year ever where there were over 100 incidents every month. And it used to be that when there was conflict in Israel-Palestine or a spike in violence, there was a spike in anti-Semitism. But it's actually now that when there is discussion over anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, there is more anti-Semitism. So the spikes of last year were in April and over the summer. So April was directly after the Enough is Enough demo, and the summer was when we had what seemed like an endless debate over the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So by speaking out, we inherently as a community bring it upon ourselves to make it worse, and I only dread to think what Luciana will have received in the past few days since she resigned. And for me, the roadmap has been set. We have the Jewish community institutions have put it out. Adam and I sat in a 3.5-hour meeting with Jenny Formby and followed up with a 19-point letter which said these are the things we discussed. These are the way that the Jewish Labour movement, the affiliate of the Labour Party for 99 years, thinks this can be solved. And to my account, only 1.5 of those have been progressed. And the one was writing to the admins of the Labour Party groups to try and take some of this heat out of the debate. And I think at the moment, the Labour Party are producing a lot of light, but absolutely no heat. And the question I have for those with agency, and because I cannot do anything to change it, is how long is this journey that Jeremy goes on? How long is this journey that the Labour Party has to go through? How much more do I have to suffer till the Labour Party gets it right? And that only comes with positive, tangible, and action that is now. And I don't know if that's what Adam said in terms of chucking everyone out immediately, but some of it is very simple. Some of it is Jeremy Corbyn retweeting an anti-Semitic tweet that Luciana has received saying, "You do not do this in my name. I have sent to the Labour Party a complaint. I will be following this up. Expect to hear from the Labour Party." It's about moral leadership. Because yes, anti-Semitism has had electoral impacts. If you're a Labour Party member, you should not be focusing on the electoral impacts. You should be caring about the moral implications of anti-Semitism. And until we see that real leadership from the top, and let's face it, Jeremy has control of every element of the Labour Party. The NCC, the National Constitution Committee, is in the power of him. The National Executive follow his lead. The chairs of constituencies around the country follow his lead because he has such an overwhelming majority. The gift of leadership is in his power, and until he takes that, I do not think there is going to be any heat in this debate. I think it's only going to be light, and I think it's only going to get worse for those of us still there.
Adam Wagner, the question was about what can be done inside and outside the Jewish community. Is it something that the Jewish community should take any responsibility for whatsoever, or?
I think the Jewish community has done a pretty fantastic job, actually, in the circumstances. Group of 250,000 people, a bit of a random collection, usually arguing amongst themselves before they can even get out of a building. I think the Jewish community has acted, with grace and dignity on the whole, and I think the ball is now in the Labour Party's court, and I can't see any prospects of the kind of leadership that Ella rightly talks about coming from Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. I mean, let's just do an analogy. Most people in here will have worked in companies. Imagine a large corporation. You don't need to imagine this happens all the time. A large corporation develops a bad culture, a stinking culture, whether call it sexism. And the bosses at the top are implicated, either because over the years they have perpetrated themselves, or they've watched on as their senior colleagues who are now senior or once junior did it themselves, and that they have absolutely there's a huge amount of self-interest for them doing nothing about it or going through the motions. At the same time, they've packed the board with their mates who will never go against them. Who is in power? Who has the power in that company with its stinking culture to do something about it? Is it the victims of the secretaries or the junior workers or whoever who are the victims of this sexist culture, or is it the bosses? And realistically, if a external body went in and said, if the board decided to bring someone in and say, you know what we're going to do about it, they're not going to say, yes, that 69-year-old CEO who's been involved in this culture all his life, let's keep him on and give him one more chance. They're going to say, get rid of the leadership, and we'll start again. And we have to root this out from the top and from the bottom, and there's no other way. And that's how you do it in any major institution. And I cannot see, they've had 3 years. I mean, what has happened in that part it is almost comedic what they've got away with, really. And I come at it from a legal perspective. You know, the fact that they've got Peter Wilson on the group that decides anti-Semitism claims, or is in charge of anti-Semitism, this guy who's gone on some anti-Semitic rant, and he was elected back in. The fact that they've got Jewish Voice for Labour, and I'm sure there are good people in Jewish Voice for Labour who think they're doing the right thing, but for me, they are a fig leaf. They're set up to effectively reduce the claims of anti-Semitism, and that's what they go about doing. And it's a joke that this continues within an organisation that calls itself anti-racist, and yet it does. And it wouldn't. Any judge looking at this in a discrimination claim would take 5 seconds to look at it and say, this is outrageous what has been happening in the Labour Party. It's outrageous. It's nothing to do with anti-racism. It is racism in itself, in the structures, in the culture, in the leadership, in the whole gamut. So I think, I'm afraid to say, this isn't just about Jeremy going on a journey. I think that door is closed. This is about a really serious problem. Jewish MPs are leaving. Young Jewish activists are leaving. I don't have an answer, but I think it's much more serious than a lot of people realise.
Mike,
Adam, you wrote a very good article at one point for the Jewish News and Jewish Chronicle about attacks within the Jewish community on other Jews for people who held a particular position in Israel. And what I see happening now is attacks on people who've decided to stay in the Labour Party or who support Jeremy Corbyn within the community, which I think are sometimes, whether they're warranted or not, are couched in very inflammatory language, which I hope is something you agree with.
May I, as a member of Jewish Voice for Labour, be allowed to make a contribution in the most conciliatory...
Just very quickly, we are running out of time, but go on this point, if you will.
It's just to say...
Let's go on.
If you introduce yourself, if you can as well.
Sorry, I'm Richard Cooper. I'm a founding member of Jewish Voice for Labour. I am utterly opposed to anti-Semitism, and we campaign on a daily basis about it. We speak in dozens of branches and constituencies who ask us to come along to discuss anti-Semitism, and we openly talk about the problems, and we try to deal with them by encouraging people to understand, to talk through the issues, and to develop an understanding of that. We've made a contribution to the Labour Party about the Code of Conduct, which I will give out to people later. But can I also say, our experience of the Labour Party is not the same as the picture that we've had from most of the panel. I kind of feel, I came along very openly to try to understand, knowing that I would disagree very profoundly, but trying to understand where people on the panel were coming from. I have got some insight. I would like to be able to set up a dialogue with some of those people so that the divisions within Jewish members of the Labour Party can actually be brought out into the open and talked through.
Thank you. So can I ask Miriam, can this be a dialogue, or does it have to come from the top? Let's wait until the mic comes back to you.
I'm getting sick.
I really do want to believe that Jewish Voice for Labour are on the same page as me as a lot of things, but honestly, people in my constituency who ally themselves with Jewish Voice for Labour have actually said anti-Semitism doesn't exist, and I can't understand why someone would actually Hopefully that's not representative. I doubt that's not. I don't think that's representative for you. But I think we really do need a space where actually people don't use that organisation to actually hide anti-Semitism. But on the point that you made, thank you so much for the solidarity. Genuinely, it's really important and does matter. Obviously, I face a huge amount of anti-Semitism from people who don't believe it to exist. I also get a huge amount of abuse from people who hate me for existing in the Labour Party. I get abuse. I've been accused in the space of an hour of being an agent of Benjamin Netanyahu and an agent for Seamus Mill.
in an hour. Like, how is that physically possible? I have been told that I am, you know, not actually Jewish, an actual agent, like a collaborator, a Nazi, as well as being told I'm a Nazi for, like, apparently believing in the murders of Palestinians, which I don't either. It is a real issue, and I think there's a real radicalisation, which is where Adam used earlier, and polarisation that's happening, where people who are on the left of politics believe that being anti-Semitic is somehow like a part of being left-wing, which it isn't, and are mistakenly taking on some views. And people who are within the Jewish community, or you know, people who are right-wing, are also seeing attacking people as in the Labour Party and attacking people as left-wing as a way of actually being Jewish or standing up for our values, and actually being left-wing is a Jewish value. And so I think we do need to take the heat out of the debate. I think it's really important as well.
Very, very quickly, Michael, can I just get your sort of on whether this change has to come from the top?
Yeah, no, just on the Jewish Voice for Labour thing. Having sat this, I'm not a member of Jewish Voice for Labour. I don't agree with everything that they say and do, and lots of it I don't agree with the analysis. But having sat on national television this week and been called a self-hating Jew for taking the position that I do on Labour Party politics, I think that the tone... Sorry. Having sat... I was just saying, on the note of Jewish Voice for Labour, having sat on national television this week and been called a self-hating Jew, I think it's very dangerous for us as Jewish people sat in a room to be taking attacks at other Jewish people for the positions they take on politics because of their religious identity and in relation to their religious identity. And I don't think that was what Adam meant to do, but that's what it did. And I just think the tone of debate, especially amongst our own community, needs to be better, even if we fundamentally disagree with every part of the analysis taken, or we think what they're doing is damaging. Like that's the position they've taken. I guess my final point, though, which I think really matters, is that whether we like it or not in this room, or whether some of us like it or not in this room, the Labour Party's membership supports Jeremy Corbyn. It supports the policies of the left, and Jeremy Corbyn, or someone of his tradition of the Labour Party, is going to lead the Labour Party into the short to medium term future. That's a fact. We are a small community of people, and we're not going to change that with our votes, even if the majority of Jewish people were Labour members, which they're not. And so I guess to some extent I hope that the tone when people leave here, and one of the things we take away, is that a positive outlook is really important on this. To my mind, we have two options as a community. We write off the Labour Party, we write off the hundreds of thousands of people who are part of it, many of whom, friends of mine, are young and are not anti-Semite and are progressive and exciting and the future of this country. We can write them off and say that they're an existential threat to us and we hate them all. Or we can try and find a way forward through which there is conciliation and education. And to me, that poses the much better outcome. Firstly, because I think it's more valuable and it provides us with a better way forward. But also, if we don't, the Jewish community is going to watch on as the Labour Party is elected, quite possibly, to be the next government, and we won't have solved this problem. Like, I'm not putting the onus on the Jewish community to deal with this, but we should be part of, even if the Labour Party, and it has, acted wrongly throughout this process, we should try, for our own sake, our own safety and our own future, to engage in making it better. And the more people turn away, and I don't mean leaving, I think that's a political thing to do, but the more we write off, the more we disengage, the more we say, well, that's that then, it's not going to create a way forward in which we deal with this problem. And so I hope that people leave thinking that they can.
Adam Langleben, if the choices are write off or reconcile, you've chosen to write off, haven't you?
I think it can't be fixed. My worst critics, I don't think could criticise my lack of effort. The fact that I've always felt it important to engage with all parts of the Labour Party. I'm from sort of the soft left tradition inside the Labour Party. I feel like I've made every effort to engage positively, and they're simply disinterested. They're just disinterested, and they don't want to deal with it. And I think sort of the 19-point letter suggestion, which Ella rightly said, JLM sent in, most of it was ignored. The 6 points that the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council and the CST recommended to the Jewish community are still outstanding, despite them being pretty simple and easy. In terms of how you
can I just let Adam Wagner come back on that, because we're getting close to.
I just want to respond to the Jewish Voice for Labour. I don't in the slightest say. I mean, I wrote that article in the Jewish Chronicle about calling other Jews traitors and calling other Jews a disease. You know, the kind of thing that gets bandied about. And I would never, and I have never said that about Jewish Voice for Labour. Just because they've got the word Jewish in the title doesn't mean criticising them. It's criticising them for being Jewish. I'm criticising Jewish Voice for Labour for their actions. Yeah. And I think at a certain point, Jeremy Corbyn, Jewish Voice for Labour, Peter Wilson, people in the Labour Party who I think have behaved badly, need to make some hard choices. And the hard choices have to be disassociating from anti-Semites. And that is the crux of all of this. That nobody who is in the upper echelons, and there's some very honourable exceptions, especially, for example, Momentum, and the team at Momentum have done really hard, brave work in the past year, and should be, but they are the tail that is failing to wag the dog. There have to be hard choices, and those hard choices are quite simple. And unfortunately, I think Jewish Voice for Labour, as honourable as the people within it, I'm sure are, because they seem like nice people, are part of the problem to an extent. And I think that other parts of the structures are part of the problem, and it's a big issue, and it's going to have to be. And I'm not saying you're traitors, I'm saying it's legal misguided.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've come to the end of our time. Go on, 30 seconds.
I'll just finish on a point of Jewish Voice for Labour. And we've spoken a lot about how our actions speak louder than our words, and it's what the Jewish community has been asking from the Labour Party for a long time. My wonderful American-born Orthodox rabbi signed the letter of 68 rabbis. And in his first or second sermon, he talked about how as an American and as a Jew, he had to vote for Hillary, and he wanted to vote for Hillary because of what Trump did. Pete Wilsman then goes on and calls my wonderful rabbi a Trump fanatic. JVL support that slate with Pete Wilsman on. Actions speak louder than words, and until the Labour parties do, we're done.
Okay, thank you all to all of the panel. Thank you to Adam Wagner, thank you to Miriam Mirwitch, to Adam Langleben, to Ella Rose, and to Mike Segalov. Thank you all.
And thank you to Callum as well as to all of our panellists. We really appreciate it says behind you, liberal Judaism, the home for your Jewish story. If this cannot be the place where we are able to hold a multitude of voices, then I don't know where else we can. I hope that you will join us for our next series, which is, as you can see, on the 4th of April. Every Wednesday night here, we have an education hub which has a variety of courses from basic Judaism to Judaism and Islam, as well as Jewish theology and many other things. I hope that if you have enjoyed tonight, we will see you back in our education hub. And I know before I close that we couldn't finish a Liberal Judaism night without thank you and a good night from our Chief Executive and Senior Rabbi, Rabbi Daniel.
Friends, you notice I've been uncharacteristically silent for reasons I have conflicts of interest, which are obvious and I don't need to declare. But I do want to say, on behalf of you all, I want to thank Charlie, Tom, Izzy, and we've got people in the back. I can see Robert and Leo, our team and our staff team here, who work really hard to make these events happen. And so, on your behalf, thank you to my staff, Charlie's team tonight, who put this on. Thank you.